Well, welcome to all those who are have joined us or in the midst of joining us today for a WIT panel. Today's panel is on hemp, and it's about the rise of hemp and its challenges. I'm joined here by a couple of great experts, I would say from outside the Beltway, which we always like to welcome in and take advantage of our days of doing Zoom by being able to have folks that aren't always in DC be able to bring some of their expert knowledge in on different topic areas, such as hemp. As we watch for people to come in, I just thought I'd maybe take a few moments for announcements. For those who are WIT members, you might know that we are in the midst of gearing up for our holiday reception and silent auction. The auction is actually going on right now. I know it's on my to-do list to check it out and get a sense of what I can do to donate and help support WIT in its efforts. I also entered in the gingerbread holiday contest, so my fingers are crossed. We'll see. Outside of that, for those who have not heard of WIT, Women in International Trade, we are a professional development organization. I like to say for all those of us who love international trade and want to uplift each other, especially in the space of women in our professional development, if you have not checked out our, well, hopefully you checked out our website as you went to the link to sign up for this. I encourage you to go back and consider membership. You do not have to be within DC to be active in WIT, so take a chance of thinking of how this could perhaps play a role in your own professional development. I think we have one more panelist that is trying to get on. There's always a little fun with technology issues. If I can have some WIT support team just check in on that with our panelists, that would be great. In the meantime, when he's hopefully being able to get connected, I think I'll move ahead, and first I'll introduce myself. I'm Cassandra Kubal. I work at Michael Torrey Associates. We are a boutique lobbying firm based in DC where we focus on food and agricultural issues. Excellent, looks like we have our other panelists joining. Anyway, and I'm also the co-chair of the WIT Agriculture event group. So all the agriculture focused panels like this one today, I and my colleague Lorraine Hawley from ADM are in charge of those. I will now move into introducing our panel for today. First up, I would like to welcome Gail Greenman, who's Director of National Affairs with the Oregon Farm Bureau. Born in Georgetown and raised in Washington, D.C., though not located here anymore, Gail developed an early love for policy. Some of her issue areas include farm bill policy, transportation, rural education, energy, broadband, labor, tax, and trade. A whole slew of issues, of course, that we face in food and agriculture. Prior to joining the Oregon Farm Bureau in 2006, Gail worked on the federal education policy arena as Director of Government Affairs for the National Association of Federally Impacted Schools and Director of Corporate Relations for the Federally Impacted Schools Educational Foundation as a consultant for the National Council for Impacted Schools. Gail is a proud Hoosier, graduating from Indiana University with honors and a member of the American League of Lobbyists, Oregon Department of Agriculture Food Safety Advisory Committee, and National 2018 Farm Bill Working Group, along with the American Farm Bureau Federation Legal Information Network. Gail now resides in Oregon, where she is an active member in the community of West Lynn, and has with her husband Joe and two daughters, Gabrielle and Ava. In addition, we have Courtney Moran from Earth Law. She is the founding principal of Earth Law and chief legislative strategist for the Agricultural Hemp Solutions, and is leading expert on U.S. hemp law, championing legal policy for sustainable cannabis hemp agribusiness development. Courtney worked closely with the offices of Senator Wyden and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell in drafting and negotiating Hemp Farming Act of 2018, the language included in the 2018 Farm Bill. the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, which federally legalized hemp, and what is leading us to today's discussion. She lobbies on behalf of Oregon Industrial Hemp Farmers Association, passing forward-thinking legislation protecting Oregon hemp agricultural interests. Courtney authored and strategically guided the passage and implementation of legislation establishing hemp programs for the states of South Carolina, Wisconsin, Alaska, and Missouri. Courtney currently serves as second vice chair of the National NORML, NORML Board of Directors, on the Friends of Hemp Board of Directors, and on the Oregon State Bar Cannabis Law Section Executive Committee. She's a former board member of the Hemp Industries Association, Oregon Hemp Industries Association, Pacific Northwest Hemp Industries Association, South Carolina Hemp Farmers Association, and the International Cannabis Bar Association. Very busy. And last but not least, and I'm glad he was able to join us, Frank Robison with Robison Law. Frank is the founder of Robison Law and provides legal solutions to hemp industries for approximately 10 years. He started his law-focused hemp journey as Special Assistant Attorney General, working with the Colorado Department of Agriculture and the University of Colorado, creating compliant paths to conduct research with hemp. Prior to his legal career, Frank worked on a kibbutz in Israel, apologize if I mispronounced that, a banana farm working with various irrigation systems and soil conservation and organic fertilizers. Frank has also participated in Sister City Agricultural Focus Program in rural Nicaragua immediately after the Sandinista-Contra War, which paired former Sandinistas and Contra soldiers together to work on community crop diversification. He's also a former Peace Corps volunteer, working as an agricultural extensionist in Honduras, and has had a very robust background across the globe, so very impressive background. Frank has also been a business manager and entrepreneur working with fiber optic networks in Latin America, information technology, and robotics and automation. In addition to being a lawyer and a business person, Frank is licensed U.S. Customs broker and has LMSs in tax, constitutional, international food, and entrepreneurial laws, as well as master's degree in international management and policy. So clearly we have a robust panel here today, and I'd love to be able to move right into getting to the heart of the topic on hemp. There's been a lot that has been taking place in the last few years in particular, as we heard through the bios, that a lot of things have changed since the 2018 Farm Bill for industrial hemp and its uses. While there's been a whole opening of pathway along with the 2018 Farm Bill, there has been no shortage of regulatory hurdles that we have been watching in the United States come in our way. What I would love to be able to do is unpack that a little bit further. In addition to taking into concept, not only on the domestic end of it, what does this mean on the global perspective in trade? So I'm going to actually hand it over to our panelists to open up with a few brief comments in this area to kind of set the stage, and then we'll go into a bit of a back and forth for this panel, and then we'll open it up for Q&A to the larger audience. So to kick it off, I think I'm going to have Courtney first kick it off for us. Thank you, Courtney.
Absolutely. Well, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon to those on the East Coast. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Cassandra. And I'm really grateful for WIT here today to be part of this panel and to share some very specific details about what's going on in the hemp industry. While it is a new agricultural commodity for our generations, this crop has been grown for thousands of years, not only in our country, all over the world. It's been grown for thousands of years, and we have seen regulatory hurdles come up over this crop over the last century and a half. And you'll hear today some specifics of what has happened not only domestically from our regulatory perspective, but some examples of what's happening in different states, but also what's happening in the global marketplace. And so I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation for all of you to kind of hear this landscape of what's happening not only domestically in the US, but how this has played out in different states, and then how this is actually setting us up for engagement on the global stage. Now, in the US, hemp was actually grown for centuries all around the country. And it was not until the 1930s with the Marijuana Tax Act when we really started seeing major decline of hemp production. And that led to decline of production, but then also seeing a resurgence of production during World War II for the war effort. After the war, we saw a decline again, and by 1970, total prohibition with the enactment of the Controlled Substances Act. And so from then on, we did not see any cultivation in our country, but there was cultivation happening throughout the world. And so this was already putting the US at a disadvantage compared to the global marketplace. But states started seeing what was happening in other countries. And in particular, North Dakota started seeing the production that was happening in Canada, because Canada had actually re-legalized commercial hemp production in 1998 after a 4-year pilot program up there of doing research since 1994. And those farmers saw, we have this imaginary border here where my land is touching the same land, and these Canadian farmers can grow this crop, and yet I cannot grow this crop. And so we started really seeing advocacy as early as 1999 in trying to re-legalize hemp for commercial production here in the United States. And although we did see additional advocacy and legalization in multiple states, actually in 9 states between 1999 to 2013, it was not until 2014 that we actually saw any federal legislation that particularly authorized production of hemp in the United States. In 2014, the 2014 Farm Bill included a clause, Section 7606, that authorized industrial hemp research in states that had already legalized hemp, and they could establish an agricultural pilot program through their state departments of agriculture to study the growth, cultivation, and marketing of industrial hemp. And with that language, we saw an incredible exponential growth in the number of states that started legalizing hemp and providing this opportunity for their farmers. And along with that, an exponential growth in the amount of acres that actually were being produced and the number of farmers that wanted to engage in these programs. And so as we start seeing the development of these research programs, more and more states are coming online, and we start to get more support from our federal members of Congress for this crop and for seeing hemp truly as an agricultural commodity. And it really did start establishing some incredible new economic opportunities for the states. And one really amazing benefit of the 2014 Farm Bill was that the language was very vague. It's just set up an agricultural pilot program, did not have really any particular requirements. And so states were able to do kind of what they wanted. They could set up research programs as they saw fit to really support their farmers and to develop an industry within their states. Now, of course, that has had some negative impacts as we have a lack of uniformity across the country in what is and is not allowed in certain jurisdictions. However, states were able to really advance and protect their farmers and their industry and have been able to develop some very solid programs because of that freedom that they had. Now, fast forward to 2018, is that as we continue to develop these programs and we're gaining more and more support, and there's increase in the market share for different hemp products, members of Congress decided, we've seen that this pilot program is working and we want to truly establish hemp as an agricultural commodity and really actually legalize the commercial production of this crop. And Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell was our chief sponsor and really helped get this bill over the finish line, including the 2018 Farm Bill. It was actually Senator Wyden who was the initial sponsor of this bill. He had actually introduced Hemp Farming Acts into Congress 4 times before the 2018 Hemp Farming Act. So that was actually the 5th time that a Senate bill had been introduced to actually fully legalize hemp. But the difference with this bill was that this bill really set up a comprehensive framework for establishment of a hemp program, whereas the previous iterations of the bill were really focused on just removing hemp from the definition of marijuana and removing hemp from the Controlled Substances Act. So with the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, we have finally full commercial legalization of hemp. We establish hemp as a legal agricultural commodity and reestablish USDA as the regulatory body that has regulatory jurisdiction and oversight over the program. And the goal, among many of the goals, was to establish this uniformity so that we know that a crop grown in Oregon is still legal when it gets to Missouri, is still legal if it gets down to Florida. And that was, that's one of the many goals of creating this federal framework. However, that's not what we've seen yet to date. And we've actually seen more regulatory hurdles now that hemp is federally legal than when hemp was still just operating under this 2014 pilot program. And right now, we actually have several states that are operating under the 2014 Farm Bill and other states that are operating under the 2018 Farm Bill and tribal jurisdictions that are operating under the 2018 Farm Bill. So with the 2018 Farm Bill, we have reestablished hemp as an agricultural commodity, and now the jurisdiction has fallen into the different federal agencies, respective of what they're allowed to cover by the authorizations from Congress. And so we have direct oversight of hemp production by USDA. So USDA, took the lead and actually moved quite quickly in introducing their first round of rules. And last October 31st of 2019, they actually published interim final rules, meaning that the rules were effective upon publication, but were not final. And so those rules set up the framework for establishment of a domestic hemp production program. Those rules sunset October 31st of 2021. And so we will see final rules by that time. We are actually likely to see final rules much quicker and likely by early 2021 before the 2021 production season. But there's been major concerns with these rules that have come out by USDA. And as I mentioned earlier, some of these rules are actually more restrictive than the pilot programs that states have been operating under the 2014 Farm Bill. There's a really universal concern about the testing requirements under the USDA rules, mandatory testing of every single lot, non-representative sampling methodologies, a 15-day harvest window with each sampling, requirement that all laboratories used for testing use DEA registered labs, establishing an arbitrary negligence threshold, just to name a few of these key concerns. And because of these concerns, several states, as I mentioned, have opted to continue operating under the 2014 Farm Bill. So we actually see that there are 38 tribes that have approved plans under the 2018 Farm Bill and these USDA rules because they were not allowed to operate under the 2014 Farm Bill. We have 26 states that are operating under the 2018 Farm Bill, 3 states that elected to have their programs regulated directly by USDA, but 20 states that remain under the 2014 Farm Bill. And this is because of these concerns with these USDA rules and how restrictive they have been, or how restrictive they are. And there have been numerous objections from Congress to these rules, especially from Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley. They have written multiple letters to USDA. Several other senators have also written letters to USDA out of concern for what these rules mean to the industry, and as such has actually led to an extension of the 2014 Farm Bill. The 2014 Farm Bill was supposed to be repealed on October 31st of this year, but because there's been such broad concern about what these rules mean and how detrimental they could be to our programs, that we actually had an extension granted until September 30th of 2021 for the 2014 Farm Bill. And right now, still actually in the pipeline is a new piece of legislation, a new spending bill clause that was proposed by the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture last week that would actually extend the 2014 Farm Bill all the way into January of 2022. So we have a lot of support coming from Congress to continue to protect these programs, but we are facing, major regulatory hurdles and regulatory uncertainty right there at the farm gate with USDA. Now, they're not the only agency that has started to implement the 2018 Farm Bill and create regulations, but now we are also seeing rules come out from the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration. And while the intent of the 2018 Farm Bill was to remove hemp from the Controlled Substances Act and get DEA out of the picture, DEA actually issued rules in August, interim final rules again. And so those rules were effective upon publication, but are not yet final. So we are still in active rulemaking with DEA. And while DEA, claimed that the purpose of these rules was just to codify the statutory amendments to the Controlled Substances Act that were made in the 2018 Farm Bill, it actually creates new burdens on our cannabinoid hemp industry and our processors. As DEA has claimed in these rules that any cannabis derivative or extract that exceeds 0.3% is a Schedule I controlled substance. So 0.3% is the threshold that was established in statute to distinguish hemp from marijuana. And now they're claiming that even if we had a lawful crop at the moment of harvest, if that THC increases at any point in the supply chain or in processing, it now becomes a Schedule I drug. Again, that is inconsistent with legislative intent. We've seen objections from Senator Wyden and Senator Merkley and from several members of the House writing letters to DEA, and there is actually a lawsuit pending right now against DEA over these rules. Now, another agency getting involved is the FDA. And FDA, they were actually the first to come out and make statements. They actually made statements on their position on hemp the day that the 2018 Farm Bill was signed. And they have been very consistent in their messaging that it is unlawful to introduce CBD as a food or dietary supplement into interstate commerce. And now they've been very consistent with this. There's been a lot of advocacy efforts to try to change those policies to open up the marketplace for specifically hemp-derived CBD, but to clarify the legality of other hemp-derived cannabinoids. But we still have not seen clear guidance from FDA. They did actually submit cannabidiol enforcement policy guidance to the White House back in July. Nobody has heard anything since it was sent there, and that guidance is not yet released to the public. So as you've heard, we have legalized hemp and we've gotten over the largest hurdle that there is. We are still in rulemaking with all of these agencies, and the lack of clear regulations or regulations consistent with the intent of the 2018 Farm Bill is impacting the entire value chain. And so everyone is trying to get to market, and we're really trying to set up a framework. But the takeaway from all of this is that we're in a really key time. We are in active rulemaking with our agencies. We have a new congressional session coming up starting in January, which is providing us with a really incredible opportunity to create regulatory uniformity and clarity, and to help advance hemp not only domestically, but into the global marketplace.
Great. Thanks, Courtney. It really does help us run down and get a sense of all the pieces that are involved in this on the regulatory end, and especially as we think about it from agency to agency. I'd like to turn it over to Frank to kind of give us more of the taste from the import-export side of it. So not just US and what's going on in our own system, but also how we see it on that global stage.
Okay. So I'll briefly reintroduce myself. My name is Frank Robison. I work at law firm Robison Law. I also have a corporation called Hemp Without Borders. The purpose of Hemp Without Borders is to promote commercial transactions internationally involving hemp. So those are the two things in addition to my family, and including my dogs that take up pretty much 100% of my time. And so With respect to the international movement of hemp products, it becomes a very complex regulatory scheme, commercial scheme, commercial framework, because you need to look at every transaction on multiple levels. And so you need to look at, so if you're exporting, let's just say for example, from the United States, is it lawful to export a product? Let's just lump our products into 3 categories, although there's probably 300,000 categories. Let's just say, for example, we're going to lump them into just hemp biomass, hemp that's processed for human consumption, and one more, just for the purposes of making an example, hemp that's been incorporated into cosmetic products that are applied to the outside of your body. You need to look at from when you're exporting it, you need to look at each of those products, each of those markets, what laws apply, what regulations apply, and is it lawful to export that product? And then in turn, you need to do the same analysis on the other side of the border, other side of the pond, at the other end of the transaction. And incredibly, sometimes you have to do it also if that common carrier that you're using happens to stop in another country, and unfortunately, sometimes another United States state along the way. What are its practices? So it becomes multi-layered and nuanced, depending on what you're shipping and where, or let's just say what you're importing or exporting respectively, and to where. And then one of the most fundamentally frustrating topics in hemp is hemp has an arbitrarily low percentage of what separates hemp from marijuana or low THC and high THC cannabis is arbitrary. It's 0.3% THC on a dry weight basis. This is a number that's been used for many years. In Europe, it's traditionally been 0.2%, recently raised to 0.3% in most cases. But certain countries are using 1%. 1% is a much more logical number for hemp. It's much easier to grow hemp at 1% THC threshold or below level. But that nuance in itself creates a legal question. If I'm importing a product, let's just say from Switzerland or Colombia, where their legal threshold is 1%, into the United States, and our legal threshold for hemp is 0.3%, is Customs, is Homeland Security going to be looking at the plant from which it came, which under US law would be marijuana, or the product which is being imported into the United States. And so you have these nuances that are layered upon nuance, and it creates for very interesting yet very risky commercial transactions. And risky in this, in most cases, if you do your proper due diligence and you look at the legal landscape at both ends of the transaction, it's risky because, quite candidly, with all due respect to the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Protection, I'm a U.S. Customs broker. My wife is a U.S. Customs broker. We work with U.S. Customs literally daily. They don't know, they don't understand. And it's hard to blame them because I think policies, regulations, and laws are changing pretty much in real time. That said, that's not much. Not much solace to the person that's trying to that's had $1 million worth of merchandise, or for that matter, $100,000 worth of merchandise seized when it's being exported out of the United States or imported into the United States, or seized in the UK, or seized in Mexico, or wherever. I mean, just pick your market. But in any event, one of the things I just pulled up on another device for people that are wanting to learn about how to start navigating one of the more fun markets, but yet frustrating markets to work in, which is the European Union. It's Article 10 regulation. It's 2015/2283. And that's the regulation where you, it's really the starting point of all hemp analysis in the European Union. So if you write down Article 10 regulation 2015/2283, it provides the guidance of authorizing putting a novel food into market in the European Union. Unfortunately, over the last few years, the European Union has taken a few steps back with hemp, where hemp was traditionally, forgive my use of this word, the double use of the word traditional, was traditionally a traditional food. It became a novel food. And not only that, now certain cannabinoids besides THC have been deemed narcotics, making it even more difficult to work with certain European Union countries with respect to certain products. If we're talking about, hemp textiles, it's one thing. If we're talking about something that's ingested into your body, the legal landscape in the European Union literally today is different than it was 6 months ago, and it's different than it was 2 years ago. And it's different not in a progressive way, it's different in a regressive way. And we could do interest analyses, and have interesting and discuss interesting stories with respect to almost any hemp market in the world, whether it be France, Canada, China, up and coming markets such as, Colombia is getting established. Mexico is going to be coming online soon. They all have these various nuances with respect to, what is the product, where are you shipping it, and how is hemp defined? And it's not, and there's no uniformity, making commercial transactions extremely interesting and risky. And I guess that's one of the things that keeps me employed.
Thanks, Frank. Very appreciative of that. And I think we'll probably get a little bit deeper into that as when we talk about no uniformity a little bit later in some questions. I'd like to turn it over now to Gail to give us a little more of that perspective from, I'd say, the beginning of the supply chain with the farm industry in particular. So Gail, if you'd love to provide us some comments there.
Absolutely. Thank you, Cassandra. As Cassandra said, my name is Gail Greenman. I handle the entire federal policy portfolio for Oregon Farm Bureau. So obviously coming directly from the farmer rancher perspective, that is who our membership is. Just to give you a little bit of background on Oregon agriculture, because it is unique and it's something that we're very proud of. We raise more than 250 recognized commodities at this point. We're second only to California. So those range from wheat to salmon and everything in between. Some of our top commodities by value include dairy, nursery stock, hops, wine grapes, peppermint, potatoes. I mean, the list is really endless. We have about 38,000, maybe a touch more farms covering about 16 million-ish. It does fluctuate acres, but our products are sought all over the world. So probably most in the audience have heard of Tillamook cheese. So that starts with our dairy cows and our dairymen out on the coast. And then, of course, the farmer cooperative, famously known as Tillamook Creamery. But there are other examples that we're really proud of. I have a farmer who is well diversified, who has patented his own rhubarb and sells to a large cider house. We have an example of, for those in DC, the National Mall, which obviously looked a little long in the tooth not too long ago. It's been several years now, but our Oregon grass seed was used to replant the National Mall. So kind of seeing where our products go. And then we're really proud of, we have a ranch out in Central Oregon in Wasco County called Imperial Stock Ranch. And they raise sheep, and they were falling on some really hard times. And as farmers typically do, they innovate themselves, they think outside the box, and they said, well, we raise sheep, what if we start making our own yarn? And that turned into Imperial Yarn, a very, very high quality, very expensive yarn, and that became really renowned as knitting and crocheting really kind of got trendy, over the last 10 to 15 years. But I tell you that because they got a random call several years back from a guy in New York saying, hey, we researched some yarn, we sourced some yarn, and we've really kind of settled on you guys. And this woman had no idea who this guy was, no idea what he was talking about. It turns out when he said, he's like, Ralph would really like to use your yarn. And that Ralph was Ralph Lauren. And they sourced Oregon yarn to make I think it was the 2014 Sochi sweater that the American athletes wore to the opening games. So our products really are known all over the world, but they really start with that farmer and or rancher. So as an industry,
that is a totally awesome story.
Isn't that cool? I mean, it's really
totally
cool.
cool.
It's one of my
Sorry to
favorites.
interrupt
It's
you.
absolutely cool. We contribute about $8 billion to the state's economy, but when you think of ancillary activities, that multiplies. We're the #1 producers in the US of 12 different commodities, and those include hazelnuts, cranberries, rhubarb, grass seed, azaleas. I mean, the list is really endless. 1 in 12 Oregonians is employed in some way related to agriculture, and 80% of what we grow leaves the state, and half of that leaves the country. So 40% of what we produce is exported around the world. Touching a little bit of history on hemp, 1906, many believe that William Randolph Hearst was responsible for a smear campaign against the crop. And there's some belief that maybe he felt that hemp was a threat to his timber holdings and used his newspaper to spread false facts and make people believe that hemp was the same as marijuana. Then came Harry Asslinger, who served as the first commissioner to the U.S. Treasury Department of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. And then shortly after that came the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. So way back then, it's not a lot different than it is now. If you want to curb an activity, the best way to try to do that is to tax it. And so that started the placement of sales on a tax of cannabis, which was overturned in 1969 and repealed a year later by Congress. But as Courtney mentioned, then came the Controlled Substances Act, and the CSA was signed into law by President Nixon, obviously establishing all of the different schedules, which hemp was a part of. And then, Oregon has long been a front runner or an early adopter of hemp and cannabis. And so, we relate back to the Cole memo, which we often talk about with relation to marijuana, but is also true for hemp. And the Cole memo was issued by then U.S. Deputy Attorney General James Cole. And the memo stated that, listen, Department of Justice, we've got limited resources, limited capabilities. We're not going to target states that have legal hemp and marijuana as long as they don't infringe on, it was the 8 different issue areas. So, think of sales to minors, interstate commerce, growing on public land. So there were 8 of those issue areas. And as long as you didn't delve into those state, producers and states were pretty much going to be okay. And then came along, as Courtney outlined really well, the 2014 Farm Bill, which established the pilot program that allowed farmers to really dip their toes into the industry in a federal sense for the first time. So pilot programs are not unusual for Congress to take up. It's usually the signal that, hey, we kind of want to start delving into this area, so we're going to dip our toe in. And that's typically what a pilot program is. It's usually part of a large authorization bill, which the Farm Bill is. So that's what happened in 2014. And then, of course, not quite 2 years ago, December of 2018, the 2018 Farm Bill was signed into law, removing hemp from the Controlled Substances Act, or as Courtney outlined, intended to remove hemp from the Controlled Substances Act. And obviously it differed, it defined the difference between hemp and marijuana of the 0.3 THC on a dry weight basis that both Courtney and Frank mentioned. But what it also allowed from a farming perspective is it allowed farmers to participate in USDA programs, predominantly something like crop insurance, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's insurance that farmers can take out on different crops to protect them in times of losses, whether it's due to markets, whether it's due to weather, there are a whole host of reasons that farming can go sideways unintentionally and not due to the fault of the farmers. So it also opened the opportunity for different certifications and competitive grants. So when we look at why would farmers want to get into this, and I think both Frank and Courtney touched on this, the products are just endless. There are an estimated 25,000 different products. And just like I mentioned with the yarn and the grass seed, it all starts with agriculture. What we see more and more of with more modern farming is a lot of farmers are getting into like that vertical integration space. So they're not only just growing the crop, they are trying to process it and make it into something as well. And so that's inclusive of obviously textiles and paper supplements, creams and lotions, food and beverage, and even fuel. So opportunities for them are endless. I mentioned certifications a minute ago. Obviously, organic certification is something that people are seeking. But actually, a week ago today, I toured a hemp oil processing facility. They grow hemp and they also process it. And so I went into the bins, the storage shed of bins of hemp. And it was first I had ever heard of it, and certainly the first time I had seen it, there was a kosher certification. And I'm of Jewish faith, and I couldn't think. I said, why in the world would you need kosher certification of hemp? And she told me, she said, well, she said, if we want to use these in supplements that people are taking, like I think of a vitamin, and they are kashrut, you would need to have a kosher certification, which I mean, blew me away. Never in my wildest dreams would I have thought of that. But obviously, other opportunities are interstate commerce, has been mentioned, financing and banking, or to be made easier, research, and of course, trade. Challenges, we're still dealing with a stigma, even within our own agricultural community. There are some who just believe that hemp is the exact same thing as marijuana. Regulations, which I think Courtney really outlined. I had never dealt, I've been in the business about 25 years, and when the first IFR was released, I said, IFR, what is that? I had never in 25 years dealt with an interim final rule. And obviously now we've seen multiple IFRs, all related back to hemp. I think maybe what the industry was expecting, well, first of all, farmers were thrilled that they finally had like a federal legal mechanism to grow hemp. And of course, it just happens, you snap your fingers and it happens. And we all know that that's not the case. I think one of the things that we were expecting were some if you will, easier or more common sense, dare I say, regulations out of USDA, given that USDA is very well versed in agriculture. And I think we were expecting some of the things that Courtney mentioned, which have happened. Maybe we were expecting something a little bit different, but we're all working our way through that. We have right to farm issues, and then that's really a state by state issue. Oregon has a very strong right to farm statute. I'm not a state lobbyist or attorney, so I know enough to be dangerous, but I do know we have a very strong right to farm statute, but even we're not immune. So anecdotally, my husband and I own a rental home in what some might consider the Portland metro area. It's really veering definitely into rural territory in the Willamette Valley. But we got a letter recently from the company that manages our HOA as the owners of the home saying, hey, we really want you to participate in this public meeting for the citizens of Malala who are against a hemp processing facility coming into town. And it sounds to me like it's dealing with odor issues. So, on these regulations and everything else, it's this peeling onion that as policy people we know to expect, but as producers they just get frustrated. This was legal and it was almost easier before it was legal federally. So it's going to take some time to work our way through those issues. One of the other challenges that I would mention that's certainly improved over the last year is limited crop tools. Since December of last year, the EPA has approved 47 pesticides for use on hemp, which is obviously an invaluable tool for the industry. I can tell you that transportation has continued to be an issue. I have several members who have run into several different problems, primarily all related to transportation. One dealt with a USPS issue, a US Postal Service issue. I never knew that there was a criminal arm to USPS, so that was something new and different that I got to do. And then one dealing with truck and interstate commerce. So those issues are definitely we're still dealing with them as an industry, but I would expect, going back to that specialty crop and the things that we're so proud of, I would expect at the end of the day, hemp to be no different, and for Oregon farmers and ranchers to be a shining example of that.
Great, thank you so much, Gail. I have a few questions that I like to lead off with, but I also encourage our attendees to use the Q&A section to start sharing your questions for the panelists that you would like to have them answer. So the earlier you can tee them up, the better. Also recognizing I want to be mindful of time. So we have just under 15 minutes to really get in a little deeper, which you're probably thinking, how can we get deeper? There's already a lot that we've covered. But I would love to be able to first start off with what lessons, and this is, I'm going to toss over to Courtney and Frank, what lessons of what to do or not to do should the U.S. take from other markets? I think, Frank, you touched a little on this, but I would love to open it up to you and Courtney for unpacking it a bit more.
U.S. should do what to do from based on other market experiences. Oof. Well, the U.S. is an example of things what not to do all across the board. So it's very difficult for me to think. It's difficult off the cuff for me to find something another market is doing that we shouldn't do. But I suppose, I mean, if you wanted to drill down deeper with respect to the European Union, it is taking massive steps backwards from a traditional food to a novel food to a narcotic. And it's doing this without, from my perspective, which is in significant part biased, because I've been working in this industry providing services to people in this industry for quite some time. They're doing it from my perspective arbitrarily and without data. It's a knee-jerk reaction. They're saying we don't have the data, and therefore it needs to be a novel food. And now we don't have the data, therefore CBD is therefore a narcotic. And to take these types of steps backwards, as opposed to finding solutions to keeping products on the market that just aren't going to go anywhere, despite what the law says. They're not going to stop doing what they've been doing for years, if not decades. And so I would say let's avoid drawing arbitrary lines when, forgive my agricultural cliche, when the horses are just not only out of the barn, they're in the field running through the pasture. And so you don't want to be drawing arbitrary lines on a market that just already exists. It needs to take into consideration the reality of what is happening. That said, I was reading an article just yesterday, actually, that was comparing I think it was from about a year ago, that was comparing Oregon and Washington hemp, or was it cannabis generally, pesticide testing protocols, and the amount of residuals in the Oregon hemp was much lower than the amount of residuals in the Washington hemp, or cannabis, excuse me, I think in this case of this article, and it was in significant part due to the efficiency of the of Oregon's testing protocol. So that said, if you have something like that where your residual pesticides are well above what a comparable food would be, what would be appropriate pursuant to the EPA or the USDA or the FDA, then perhaps maybe it's appropriate to draw a line and to correct those wrongs. But generally speaking, arbitrary lines without considering stakeholders and what is going on in the market is something that we should be avoiding, and that's something that I think Europe is unfortunately working through right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo what Frank just said. The arbitrary lines is really what's hurting the advancement of the industry and creating the ripple effect with all these different agencies. Congress took action, and we had the intent in writing that legislation and passing the legislation that hemp is not a controlled substance. Hemp is an agricultural commodity regulated by USDA. It spells it right out in the Farm Bill. But the fact that, we've had prohibition for 80 plus years and we still have marijuana prohibition is really creating this barrier, and hemp is still being treated like a controlled substance by our agencies. And it's trickling down and having a ripple effect down in the states and how they're regulating it. And so if our government could do one thing, it would be truly recognize the intent of the Farm Bill, the 2018 Farm Bill, and treat hemp as an agricultural commodity. And if we really did that, then we could learn these lessons from other countries. China has, and several other nations have major fiber producing capabilities, and they have developed incredible infrastructure, and they are leading the world in fiber production. And so why are we hurting fiber farmers when we know it has no intoxicating capabilities? It's not even used for consumption. We should really be protecting the fiber market and really setting that up. We can look to Canada. They have, I explained earlier, they started a pilot program similar to ours, did research for 4 years. They commercialized the program in 1998. So they've been operating now in a commercial space for 22 years. They are the leading producers of hemp grain, and they export all over the world. And we have been major importers of their grain, meaning like true traditional hemp foods coming from the seed. So what they do in Canada is that they actually limit what fields that they are sampling and testing based on known varieties. And that is something that we should be doing here. Why are we out sampling and testing fields that are very clearly being grown for grain or fiber? We know there's no potential for intoxication with these types of crops. Why are we wasting farmers' time and money? Why are we wasting regulators' time and money in testing these crops? And so we can look to Canada to follow those types of testing and sampling methodologies. And Frank mentioned earlier, the 1% threshold is the scientific intoxication threshold for cannabis. That is what we really should be regulating on. I can say that when we were negotiating the 2018 Farm Bill, we had most offices up to the 1%. We couldn't get every office on board. And that's something that I am particularly, very focused in my advocacy to change federally and, in as many states as possible, because if we have a science-based threshold, a lot of these farmers that are facing issues about whether they can actually harvest their crops or not, and will it be compliant or not, will not be there. And some of these other concerns that we have with the rules won't be such big hurdles for them. And so it's looking at, simple things like that of advancements that other countries have done, but then also learning lessons like Frank's been explaining about what's happening in the European Union. They're actually taking steps back, because we're at this critical time, right? We legalized hemp. We are in all these active rulemakings with our agencies, we could set up the best hemp program in the world. We could really support our farmers, really support and allow our value chain to expand, make sure we have safe products going into the marketplace. And we can do that right now. But if our agencies keep looking at this as a controlled substance and not realize that these are real farmers and they are very serious businessmen and women who are out there trying to establish this market, and it's already out there, like Frank said, it's happening. It's happened before their regulations are in place. So if our government wants to see hemp be a major commodity for this country, then they need to get behind the intent of Congress.
To combine the comment made by Gail and a comment made by Courtney, it's common sense to be regulating the crop differently based on its purpose. Gail mentioned pesticides. Courtney mentioned fiber and seed. These are issues that are extremely important to farmers. They're extremely important to people that may ultimately put it in their body. They may ultimately inhale it into their body. But the same pesticides, different pesticides are appropriate for fiber. Different pesticides are appropriate for grain, and different pesticides are appropriate if the biomass in some way is combusted, if it's smoked, or if you want to put the vapors into your body. And these are very common sense lessons that other countries have learned, particularly with respect to fiber and grain. And we're having a very hard time learning these lessons from other countries. And I think Gail mentioned that there was only 47, maybe 37, she said, approved pesticides. That just shouldn't be the case if you're if the purpose of your if the end use of your harvest is fiber. There's just many more than 37 pesticides that would be suitable to be used for a fiber crop, but they're not approved because the EPA, I don't want to say that they're confused. They just don't know how to handle the fact that it could potentially have different end uses, and because it could have potential different end uses, they're approaching perhaps too carefully what is an approved pesticide, but that creates havoc not only in the United States from state to state, but also internationally. What other countries are using.
Thanks. Actually, we have a question from one of our attendees. Good question. In addition to having your product seized at the border, do hemp importers run the risk of fines or jail time?
Technically you could. I've worked with a lot of detentions and seizures. Fines are definitely something that could happen. I have not seen. I am not aware of jail time in any, at least not in the last. Let's just say since the 2018 Farm Bill. I'm not aware of any jail time, but fines are definitely a possibility. And if your property gets seized, CBP may fine you as well. And sometimes these fines are quite large. Usually the value of the product, the declared value of the product. And if they think the declared value of the product is incorrect, they'll raise it and they'll fine you that too. And so not only will they take your property, they'll fine you the amount of the value of your product, and that is commonplace. And those can become very high stakes interactions with the federal government.
Hemp has not traditionally been part of comprehensive trade agreements, at least by the lens for the United States. I'm curious, what are folks' thoughts? Do you see this changing anytime in the future?
Repeat the question, I'm sorry.
Hemp as it relates to being a little bit more of a significant part of a comprehensive trade agreement. especially recognizing the differentiation in markets. I'd say that could fall on the technical barriers to trade side.
I think there's been, with respect to international trade, with international trade, international commerce, that there have been inroads, but they've been minor. There's too much of a patchwork internationally to make massive inroads at this point. But certain international barriers have fallen with respect to hemp and CBD specifically. But with respect to international trade and and having uniform rules and having it part of the global international commercial landscape, I think we have a long ways to go. I don't see, at least in the 1 to 2 year time horizon, that we're not looking at in a country to country, from a country to country perspective, as opposed to this being a global commodity. I hope I'm wrong on that regard.
Gail or Courtney, and I think that will be our last question, by the way.
I would just say, I think, we've seen a lot of activity, as the audience knows far better than me, in the space of trade in the last 4 years. And with the change in administration, I do think we'll see different trade policies. What those end up being, obviously is yet to be determined. What I would say, and this isn't directly related to like hemp as a product in terms of trade, but I mentioned the processing facility that I was at last week. And, one of the things that, we're definitely behind globally, which is, obviously been very well outlined here today. And part of that is just the infrastructure and the machinery. So this hemp processing facility that I was at last week, they brought in these machines from China. And then once they got it here, had to retrofit them for what they needed to do with the extraction process with hemp. I share that with you because the machines came from China, and that was certainly expensive enough as it was. But then I can't remember the exact timing, but when the cargo finally got here, the tariffs had been imposed on those particular Chinese goods. And so what very, very expensive machinery cost this hemp producer was then multiplied by to the tune of $80,000 in tariffs just because of when they got here. So, it's kind of, there are some ancillary issues here related to trade and specifically to hemp production, processing, extraction, all of that are in play.
That made me think of a topic an issue that I think is appropriate to raise. With respect to the World Trade Organization, I mean, it's also going to depend on what is the product. If we're going back to what Courtney had addressed, and the two products that Courtney addressed in greater detail, grain and fiber, I mean, that we're going to see that being incorporated into the global scheme more quickly than we are things that are inhaled and ingested into your body. So I would like to qualify my answer with respect to the end use of the product.
Sure.
Great. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, right now, as you heard from all of us, we're still in this development phase of not only the regulations, but the industry. We're in a very nascent stage. We've been growing, some states maybe 6 years. Some states are in their very first year of production. And so we're still a very small piece of this agricultural pie. And once we start seeing, larger acres produced, and we actually see more traditional farmers using hemp in rotation, I think that the question you've asked will be more relevant and more of a discussion that's actually happening on that level. And as this discussion kind of went to the development of the infrastructure, I think that's such a key piece, is that we started this with nothing. We didn't even know how to get our seeds the first year and where they were coming from. And now we are having folks trying to develop every aspect of the supply chain, whether it is for grain or fiber or for cannabinoid production. And we are really, while cannabinoid production has been the predominant area that folks have been cultivating, you know, not only in the field, but cultivating and developing the infrastructure, but we are seeing a great increase in the infrastructure development on the grain and the fiber side. And so I do think that in the future years, we're going to see a lot more production for grain and fiber. With the market decline we've seen on the CBD side, that there are a lot of farmers that are going to transition and not be solely focused on biomass or flower production, but really focused on grain and fiber. And by having that infrastructure in place, more traditional farmers will be able to come in, and by, you know, truly utilizing this crop for everything that it has to offer, that we will become a major player on the global stage, and not just for our cannabinoid production. But you know, we're right at the beginning. There's a lobbying efforts going on to ensure that we have regulatory certainty. There's litigation going on to help with that. There is, you know, farmers groups, cooperatives developing, and really just there's incredible grassroots support throughout the whole industry, which has been really awesome over this whole development of the regulatory policy. And I just think this industry, you know, continuing to come together to help advance our policy can help advance global policy, and then really set hemp up to be this amazing commodity that we all use in our daily lives.
Awesome. Thank you, Courtney. And actually, thank you not only Courtney, but Frank and Gail for being our panelists today in this robust conversation. Definitely a topic that I think we'll see more and more discussions taking place around. As we were saying, this is still very much the beginning. And so I look forward to keeping in touch with all of you and continuing the conversation later. And also thank you to all of our attendees for participating today in this panel. Have a great rest of the day.
Thank
you
you.
for inviting me in.
Thank you.
Take care.